is Justin, and I am an addict. I have been actively working the steps in the rooms of recovery since September of 2013 and am grateful to be sober, one day at a time, thanks to my God, the steps, and the fellowship of other addicts. RECO12 is an organization with the mission of learning and sharing the similarities of addiction of all kinds and gaining and sharing tools and hope from others who are walking a similar path. Speakers from our past meetings have represented many fellowships and identify with addictions with such variety as alcoholism, drugs, food, sex, gambling, theft, just to name a few. Each Friday at noon Central Time, we hold a live lunch hour speaker meeting with a recovering addict from anywhere on earth, pertaining to any or no faith tradition and with any background, who shares their experience, strength, and hope on a specified recovery topic of their choice. For the 12-week period that started on March 4th through May 20th this year, 2022, we will be focusing on each of the 12 steps of recovery. Our speaker today will share for 20 to 25 minutes on her experience with step 2, and then the live audience gets the opportunity to ask questions of her for another 20 to 25 minutes. Donations and podcast ratings and reviews are greatly appreciated, and details on doing that will be in the chat of the live meeting as well as in the show notes of the podcast. If you are listening and also feel that RECO12 is of value, please consider rating and reviewing the podcast in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. It is a great way to help get the message out to more addicts who suffer and are seeking tools for recovery. We look forward each week to receiving from the light reflected from our speakers. That light inspires hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. A quick disclaimer. While we hope that these episodes will be helpful to both sponsors and sponsees alike, the next 12 weeks, or this 12-week series of episodes, are not intended to replace the necessity of working with a sponsor through the steps. We will not be working the steps in these meetings. They are meant only to be a supplement and informative reference on what the steps mean and why they are important to the individual speaking about them. Step 2 states, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And now here's a little bit about our guest speaker, Sarvy P. Sarvy P came in through the back doors of SLAA to discover she had a debilitating addiction to marijuana. A mother of 2 small children, she could not afford to lose a single thing more. By God's grace, she woke up. From Iran to Toronto to California, the immigrant experience is interwoven into her journey as an addict. Sarvy has adventured from disconnection and denial to alignment and awakening. Her story is about somebody who had a sudden and profound spiritual experience, and through staying in the work, has been enabled to continue to allow big doses of God into her life. Sarvy, I'm excited to hear from you. The floor is yours. Take it away.
Hi, Justin. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here today. It is an absolute pleasure and honor. I'm a big fan of the show, so to be able to present today is amazing. I'm just going to time myself here because I want to be cognizant. So, hey everyone, I am Sarvy. I am a recovered addict. My primary programs are Marijuana Anonymous, MA, and SLAA. So I identify as a marijuana and love addict, and I want to talk a little bit about what that means. So I'm a marijuana and love addict, but I'm also powerless over sex and drugs. And that's an important distinction for me because I need to be able to build my program on truth. And it is with that honesty that I can set these foundational blocks in place so that I can go into having a spiritual experience. If my experience is built on lies or denial or any blurred lines, essentially, I'm going to be blocking myself off. So what it means for me to be an addict means that I have a physical craving and a mental obsession. So the physical craving means that once it is in my system, so once marijuana or love is in my system, there is no telling how much I'm going to take. Once I start, I can't stop, and I'll go out for an unknown amount of time. What it means for me to have a mental obsession means that when it's not in my system, I will think about it obsessively until it is in my system. And so I will pick up my first smoke or my first romantic relationship when I am, as my sponsor likes to call it, powder dry sober. I do the most insane things when I am sober in regards to those two things. And that's important for me to see. And so when I say that I'm powerless over sex and drugs, that means that once it's in my system, there's no telling how much I'll take, but I don't obsessively think about it. However, they are accessories to my fundamental addictions. So basically what it means for me to be an addict is that I have an abnormal reaction to a bad experience, to life in general, but specifically to bad experiences, and those that are driven by my self-will. So if I, for example, have a negative experience in a romantic relationship, my reaction is to do it more, is to exert that tool more in my life, not to put it aside and say, hey, this isn't working, so let me pick up something that is working. In fact, I'll do more of it. The same goes for marijuana. A normal reaction when something doesn't work is to stop and say, hey, let me try something different. So this is how I know that I'm in my insanity. And then I do have to just say that nothing I'm going to talk about today is original. It's been carried to me through a message by individuals who God flows through. Some is divine inspiration, but most is from this anonymous we that we have in this wonderful and beautiful fellowship. Individuals with, as I like to say, kind hearts, soft spirits, and sound minds, which is everything that I want. And I believe who we are at our core, how we were created. And it is through their stories, their knowledge, and their experience that I am able to do this thorough self-diagnosis to learn the truth about myself, because their stories have depth and weight. I see myself in them, and I also see that they have a solution, and I want what they have. So I also believe in reworking the steps frequently. That is part of what step 10 tells me, is to continue to take personal inventory and set right any new mistakes, which basically tells me that I do 4 through 9 often. And it's also important for me to do 1 through 3 often, and then work 10 through 12 on a daily basis. And we'll talk about more specifically why step 2 is such a big part of me reworking the steps on a regular basis as well. So let's just get into it. So step 2 says that I come to believe that a power greater than myself is going to restore me to sanity. So I just want to break that down. I'm a big fan of Google Define. There's a lot. I use the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and there's a lot of words in there that are either not from our time or they're just beyond my vocabulary. And so to be humble and to just look up these words so that I can actually start to have an experience with this book is important for me. So come to believe, very simple. When I come to anything, I'm moving or I'm traveling towards something. When I believe, I am accepting something is true, or I am feeling sure that it is capable of doing something for me, or something in general. When I am restored, that means that I return to a former condition, or I am given something that was previously stolen from the original owner. And sanity means to think and behave in a rational manner or have sound mental health. So to break it down, I am moving towards something that I feel is that I am sure is capable of returning me to my former condition, which was taken from me, which is of sound mental health. So that tells me that in my natural state, I am sane. I am of health. That is how I have been created. And it's hard for me to say this, especially early on in recovery. It was very difficult for me to say this, but in the eyes of higher power, I am perfectly and divinely created. I am. If higher power is inside of me and I am of higher power, then I am purposefully and artistically crafted. And that is a truth that I must remind myself of often, because it's so easy for me to come into a place where I'm like, oh, I'm sick, or I'm crazy, or I am, and then identify with all these negative attributes, and it's not true. What's true is that at my core, I am kind, loving, honest. All of the things that we strive for, all the principles of this program, they are within me to begin with. So I am just returning to my innermost truth. So I came into program as an agnostic. I was born in Tehran, Iran. And if you are familiar with that, there's a lot of religious prosecution that goes on there. It's a religious political system. And my parents essentially fled to be able to have that freedom and to have emancipation from all of the oppression that comes along with a system like that. And so I was raised to think that religion meant God, and God meant that you were brainwashed. And that was the way that it went. There was no conception of God outside of religion. And if you belonged to any religious body, it was because you were weak and you couldn't think for yourself and you couldn't just see the reality of the world. And so it was difficult for me to accept coming into a spiritual program, and especially using the word God, because of this prejudice. I remember the first time I picked up the Alcoholics Anonymous book, I was in active addiction, and it just so happened to be on someone's bookshelf that I knew. And I looked at it and I remember just like scoffing, like, oh God, wow, this is, you're going to trick yourself into thinking that this is going to help you with addiction. Addiction is a neuroscientific issue and because I am obviously qualified to have these types of opinions. And that arrogance is, I think, what really drove my denial in addiction. So I was brought to my knees. I did a thorough step 1. I learned some truths about myself and how I came into step 2, and essentially all the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I think a lot of the other recovery texts are asking us, is to admit that my ideas don't work. That's enough to make a beginning. It's not about accepting that there's a being that rules the heavens or that there's like an authority that I need to turn myself over to. It's simply admitting that my self-reliance has failed me thus far. And to continue as I am means disaster, and that's straight out of the book. And so I need to access power. And to be more moral or to be more ethical, that power isn't there. I can't do that on my own self-will. I could tell you that I had really high ethical codes, conducts, morals, philosophies, etc. But again, the book tells me I couldn't live up to them, even if I really wanted to. My life was still in disarray. So lack of power. That is my dilemma. I do not have the power to manage my own life. And my abnormal reaction to this is that when I see that I don't have power to manage my own life, what do? I exert myself more, right? If I can just control this situation a little bit more than I did before, then everything will be okay. And so that's the kind of thinking that I came into program with, right? Everyone else needs to change so that I can be all right. Well, going through, the book, going to meetings, going and speaking to fellows, something that I came to see was I believe that my addiction is a power greater than me. I will admit that all day long. But then, do I believe that if my addiction is a power that wants to kill me and make me insane, by opposite and equal laws of the universe, because I'm such a scientifically driven individual, do I believe then that there is a power out there that wants to give me life and restore me to health? Am I willing to follow that logic? And that was sound for me. So through this work, I've realized if God is top tier, my addiction is very close second. And that's the order that it goes. So if I'm not reaching for that top on a daily basis, I will fall down to those addictive patterns. It is about maintaining the uppermost level of self. And I can't do that on my own power. And so that's why I need to plug in. right? Like every day my phone's running out of battery. What do? Plug it into the power. I charge it up. So I got to do the same thing with my spirit. And so through that, I've accessed power, right? Because I'm powerless over my addiction. Yes, I'll admit that, but I'm not powerless over waking up and choosing to put higher power as my fundamental and most important relationship in my life. I can choose to work program every day. That is where I do have power. And it's not always comfortable. And it's important for me to remember that this is not a feel-good program. So when I come in, I'm seeking ease and comfort. And that's ultimately what makes me an addict, right? Is I'm always seeking ease and comfort. I need to control my environment so that I can be comfortable. But that is me worshiping my sentiment. That's me worshiping how I feel, right? And to worship something is to treat with deep respect and adoration, right? So I worship my love life. I worship marijuana. I worship even my sense of control, right? And I do this with my drug of non-choice because I don't choose it. It chooses me, right? And all of the promises of the program temporarily come true with my drug of non-choice. So I'm alone at perfect peace and ease, right? I'm useful to people around me. I feel new power flow. And all of these things are happening for me when I'm in using my drug of non-choice. However, it stops working. And so I need to turn to something that actually is going to work. And this is where the sanity starts to come in. This is where I access sanity is in step 2. By admitting that the tools that I've been using thus far have not been working. And so I put them down and I am willing to pick up a tool that does work. And here, by seeing the experiences that others have had, it is spirituality. So there is hope. And that's the principle of step 2, right? Is that there is hope and there is solution. And I get to worship whatever I spend the most time thinking about throughout my day. What I wake up thinking about, what I go to sleep thinking about. And I can choose to make that my higher power, my highest power, right? And the reason that I'm able to put aside worshiping how I feel is because I have faith, right? And we get into that as we do the rest of the steps and the evidence unfolds before us. But I can't trust how I feel. And so it's not logical for me to worship it because my feelings are based on how I think. My thinking is all jacked up. And my thinking is all jacked up because my attitudes are all jacked up. So this program shows me how to have a new attitude. And I'm so excited for us to get into 10, 11, and 12 towards the end of this workshop or episode series. Yeah. So as I get a godly attitude, I start having life that's founded on love, kindness, honesty, tolerance, right? These tools that I can employ that do work. So for me today, it's about letting go of everything I think I know on a daily basis. God, I recognize that the tools that I've been using haven't worked. So please give me new tools that do work. And so through this, I get to dismantle my prejudice, right? Because the evidence has been telling me that my self-reliance has been failing me. And on the other end, the evidence is telling me that God is working in my life, right? So here I am with a really unmanageable life, right? Everything's in shambles. And I walk in with all this prejudice and all this worship of intellect. And I'm the smartest person here. And I'll fight tooth and nail to tell you that my logic is sound, that I'm somehow qualified to be critical. But the truth is that I'm not. And so this step is very humbling. Again, all that's asking is, am I willing to admit that what I was doing wasn't working? So I can't explain intellectually what the spiritual understanding is, right? What the spiritual experience is. And that's part of why my logic doesn't work here. Whether it is qualified or not. A lot of us come in with high degrees. We have, a lot of acclimates and, accomplishments in our life. But still our life is in shambles. And so I have to be able to put aside my intellect and look at the evidence in my life through my experience. And the experience that I have had is that there is a divine power that is present. And not only does it care about the world, but it cares about me on a personal level. And that's where my agnosticism came into play, is that I admitted that there was higher power, but could I accept that it was here to have a personal vested interest in my life and to work in my life? And so as I go through this program and as I work the steps often, the evidence starts to build that actually, yes, there is a supreme being or a creative intelligence or whatever you want to call it. I call it my essence, that does have a vested interest in me. And through faith, I start to have a logical idea of things like stability, happiness, usefulness, things that I had no actual experience on, but I had a lot of opinions on. So as I go through the work again, repeatedly, I start to have several step 2 experiences. My concept of God gets bigger and bigger every time I do the work, because I'm looking for the places that I'm still grasping for control. Where do I live by self-propulsion because I don't feel that I'm taken care of? This is my agnosticism, right? And this is how I get to pick it apart, essentially, right? My detail-orientedness or my perfectionism or whatever gets used as an asset here. And every time I go through the work, I make a list. Okay, this is where I am agnostic. And as I go through the work this time, am I willing to have God remove this agnosticism from me? Am I willing to come to a place where I believe that God will restore me to a healthy place and to a sound place with these things in my life? So this is based on the idea that God is everything or God is nothing. And what is my choice to be? This is, again, where I access power. I have a choice to bring God into the situation with me. And this means that I need to have flexibility in my faith. As I grow spiritually, my faith needs to stay grounded in God, not my previous conceptions of God. That's called having faith in my faith, right? So when I first started program, my conception of God was really, really small. I had just gone to the point where God was a power greater than me and they knew the way because I didn't know. Today, my conception is far greater, but I have to move out of the way to allow these spiritual experiences as I grow. Spiritual experiences, again, not euphoric, not a feel-good program. They are painful, they are uncomfortable, they are icky, and they're filled with a lot of growing pains, right? Often when I'm in a situation where I would consider bad, I don't know what's good or bad, right? It's painful, and it actually means I'm primed for a miracle. So they are necessary because I need to have another step 1 experience so I can have another step 2 experience, right? Have my eyes pried open that I am powerless in my life. This is where it's unmanageable without God, so that I can come to a place where my conception of God grows bigger and I can address my agnosticism. So, I think that's where I'm going to wrap it up. I just want to say that I'm powerless over acting out, right? Powerless over marijuana, obsessive thinking, but I am not powerless over whether I wake up every day and seek God. And through the steps, I'm given power. And wasn't lack of power my dilemma? Yes. So as I start to take responsibility for myself, I can access freedom. Thanks so much for having me, Justin.
Thank you so much, Sarvy. That was a really powerful share. And I got so many different angles of, the step 2 concept and practice that I have not, experienced myself or have not thought of before. And I love it. Thank you so much. And that's one of the amazing things about getting different people from different backgrounds in here to share these things. We have had a few questions come in already, and I've written down several. A reminder to our live audience, if you have questions for Sarvy, please type them in the Q&A link at the bottom of your Zoom window. Looks like 2 speech bubbles over the top of each other. And we'll get to those questions here right away. First one that came in is from Carla L. And Carla asks, did you have any fear or reservations about coming to believe in something greater than yourself? How did you work past it?
Stress and trauma happen inside of the body, which means we can heal them through the body. My name is Luis Mojica. I'm a somatic therapist, nutritionist, and host of the Holistic Life Navigation podcast. Join me each week as I teach you how to release stress and trauma through listening to your body, using nutrition, somatic experiencing, and other holistic practices. You can listen at the Holistic Life Navigation podcast or at holisticlifenavigation.com.
That's a great question. Absolutely. We say this often, and it's because it's said so often, it's a little bit cliche, but it is absolutely my experience that my first conception of God was my gift of desperation. It was coming to that jumping off point where nothing that I was doing was working, and I had to get on my knees and be like, you take over. You take the steering wheel, because I don't know what I'm doing. And that's a difficult leap to take. And it's not, again, just like how I'm powerless over the solution, I'm also powerless over where I hit my bottom and when I get to come to that realization. If I wasn't, I would have probably quit a long time ago, right? And so it is ultimately just about me taking that leap of faith when it does come, when I do hit that realization that, oh my gosh, I can't go any further the way that I've been going, getting radically humble and saying, I'm willing to do anything. And again, it's about the evidence, right? So when I'm in program and I see others living happy, joyous, and free, I need to be humble enough to be like, hey, maybe I should just do what they're doing. If they're telling me, my sponsor told me things like, wake up before your kids, make amends to your dad, that all these things that I wasn't willing to do, but I did them. And on the other end of them was freedom. So again, it's just about the spiritual footwork, showing up with my feet on the ground, aligned with God's path. Even if I don't believe it, as I walk the path, the evidence in my life is going to build so that I realize, oh, hey, this is actually working for me.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. We have several questions coming in. Next one is from Val H. Val says or asks, I know that recovery is based on focusing on self, not others. We cannot change others. My question is, if the qualifier loved one is not in spiritual recovery and not taking the steps, can you continue to renew a relationship with that person? Sounds like kind of a boundaries type question, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it is about focusing on myself, but it's about focusing on how I can show up for other people. And as I do the work and I start to have a normal reaction to life, sometimes what I used to perceive as being kind and loving is no longer, my common sense becomes uncommon sense, is no longer my experience with what is kind and loving. And doing something kind and loving for someone is actually counterintuitive to my ideas that I had before I came into program. Things like letting people go, letting them have their own journeys with their higher power, letting them hit their bottom. We can't ever dispense a step one experience to someone. All we can do is move out of the way and stop trying to block them off from that experience, because my experience tells me that step one experience is what brought me to solution. So it's just about asking for, I think I've used the word experience like 7 times now, but it's about asking for a new experience and letting go of these old ideas because they don't work.
Yeah. And so in both of these answered questions, you talked or referred to that rock bottom. And in the first one, you said you're powerless over your rock bottom. And in this one, you talked about others' rock bottoms and being powerless over them. Do you believe, or do you have experience with someone choosing, hey, this is as far as I want to go, I'm willing to do this now, before that rock bottom is like a disaster? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that individual has had, because that was my experience. So essentially the next thing that I was going to lose before I came into program was my kids. And they are the most important thing in the world to me. I'm going to get emotional just talking about it. And so I was able to foresee that, and to be able to say, I worship this relationship, even if, I'm not supposed to worship any relationship in my life, but I worship this relationship in my life more than I worship the other things that are killing me. And so that thought within itself, to be able to predict, like, this is what I'm about to lose next, I think is a bottom. And so it might not happen in the material world, but I can experience it spiritually.
And what a blessing and miracle that bottom hit before you lost the next thing, your kids. And that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. All right. We have a question that came in from Zach A. Zach A says, Sarvy, thank you for sharing your experience, strength, and hope. I am a compulsive future tripper. How has connecting with your higher power helped you let go of fears and trying to control the future?
I love this question because I am also a compulsive future tripper. It's part of my condition to try and control my external circumstance, which doesn't work, right? So something I talked about in the beginning was that I am perfectly and divinely created. And even talks about in the AA book, we find God as an inner resource, something that has been within us, a fact of life that is much a reality as us, right? It's within me. I don't need to search in the external world for it. And so what that means is that where I am in this moment, how much I have, my intrinsic value is enough. It's given to me by God, and God is within me. So if I believe that God is enough, then I have to conclude that I am enough in this moment, right? Because God is within me. And so I don't need to think about all the things that are happening in the future. I need to get present. I need to feel all of my feelings in this moment. And I have to remind myself that I don't need to do anything about them. They are here because I'm supposed to experience them. And so it's just about getting grounded. It's just about speaking divine truths to myself that I am enough, I am taken care of, I am protected, and admitting that my intellect is not going to solve this problem.
Oh, that's great. And I think the next question from an anonymous attendee kind of goes along with my follow-up to what you just shared. Sometimes when I'm future tripping, yes, I recognize that, hey, I need to be present. I need to speak these affirmations, these divine truths. But my mind still goes there. And the next question is, what do you do when you see yourself grasping for control in an area of your life? And I think that relates to this also, as well as other present moments of trying to grasp for control. So what are your thoughts on that, Sarvy?
Yes. And I'm not going to come at this question from any type of spiritual hilltop. I do this. It's just about realigning in those moments, right? So the first thing I do is I disengage from the problem. If we're just talking action, the first thing I do is I disengage from the problem. And this becomes, I think this is how step 11 and step 2 go hand in hand, because step 11 talks about prayer and meditation and doing it on a daily basis, and then seeking this connection all throughout the day. And as I seek the connection all throughout the day and it becomes a working practice in my life, then I'm more, or I'm less reluctant to come to believe in step 2, right? I can allow myself to have bigger conceptions of God. So as I do this practice and I seek all throughout the day, what ends up happening is that I'll catch myself more and more. And as I catch myself and I pause, I start to have this thought that me compulsively thinking about this problem is not going to solve it. So again, let me change my attitude. Let me shift to God-centeredness. Let me sit and listen so that I can access power, so that I can do the next right thing, right? So the humility and then the realignment. And those are just principles. And those are just things that come by waking up and doing the spiritual footwork on a daily basis. We think, how will prayer and meditation solve the problems in my material life? They do, because they bring us to a place of abundance rather than a place of deprivation and always trying to seek, right?
A higher consumption of vegetables may cut your odds of developing depression by as much as 62%. An American Cancer Society study found that women who sit for more than 6 hours a day have a 40% higher death rate. Hi, my name is Maya Acosta, and I'm a health and wellness educator and host of the Healthy Lifestyle Solutions podcast. Join me and the amazing people that I get to talk to as I set out to learn how to improve our quality of life and increase our longevity. You can listen at the Healthy Lifestyle Solutions podcast or at healthylifestylesolutions.org.
I love it. One of the phrases you said there just really hit me. You know, me compulsively sitting and thinking about the problem that I have is not going to solve it. I've got to turn to the power greater than myself because I don't have that power. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, Sarvy. I appreciate it. Next question from our live audience comes from Lids. Good to see you here, Lids. Thanks for being here. Sarvy, thank you so much for sharing your step 2 experience with us today. You talked about neuroscience in addiction. How has your relationship with the science and evidence shifted now that you find your own conception of God? And she says, P.S., you're amazing. Love you. Privileged to witness you.
Love you, Lids. Thanks for being here, Boo. So first of all, I have a degree in psychology. I specialized in cognitive neuroscience, like the education, But it's also about admitting like, hey, maybe I don't know enough about this issue to have this really extreme opinion on it. And that's been a lot of freedom for me. So that's one thing. But then on the other end, when I do engage with any type of scientific information, I think because my motive is to see where God is working in it, I see alignment now. Science and faith are not these two separate entities in my life that somehow need to like coexist. They are one. It comes back to if God is everything, then God is science. I don't need to deny any of the scientific evidence that is coming out because I have faith in a highest power. And also, it allows me to go to the properly appointed authority for stuff. If I have mental health problems, I need to go to the properly appointed authority. God is only going to take me so far, right? The book says God gave us brains to use. So I go to the people who have the brains.
That's awesome. Thank you. I agree with that fully. If God did all, he did, including, he helped raise up mental health professionals to help me with those issues that can help me with that. Thank you for sharing that. Appreciate that, Sarvy. All right, we have another question from an anonymous attendee, and this is a good one, and one that I deal with on a daily basis with people that call me. How do you deal with the shame of acting out? This person is new to recovery.
Thank you for that question. I think it's so brave to ask because there is a lot of shame. And I deal with shame still. I'm not going to act like it doesn't come up. I think the first thing is fellowship. There's a reason that this is a group program. There's a reason we go to meetings. There's a reason we're supposed to stay in the middle of a herd. There's a reason we're supposed to work with a sponsor, take on sponsees. People who we can be fully honest with and have full self-disclosure with takes the power out of whatever secret it is that I'm allowing to poison me. It is shameful because it's hurtful. That's where the shame comes from, right? I don't want to associate with these hurtful acts or the people that I'm hurting in my life or how dysfunctional my life is because I hold myself to higher esteem. And that within itself is a truth that I know that in my natural state, I wouldn't be behaving in these ways. But also remembering that when I hide these things inside of me, they just fester and they get bigger. When I go through 4 through 9, it asks me to have full self-disclosure and to put it on paper, share it with God and share it with another person. And I have to do that because putting it out on paper isn't going to make the problem worse. Putting it out on paper allows me to see it so that I can ask God to remove it from me so then I can get into solution about it. And I have to do this over and over and over again. I'm not going to do one inventory and then be a saint. right? I continue to stay in the work because new stuff is always going to come up. And I guarantee you, whatever you're shameful about, there are several other people in program who have done the same or worse.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarvy. You are full of wisdom today and really opening my eyes to a lot of things, and I really appreciate that. One question, or one thing that you shared in your opening share was that you try and review and ask yourself the question, where am I agnostic today? How am I being agnostic today? Do you mind walking through a real life situation as how you work through that, whether it be from today or the last few days where you recognized, where am I agnostic today? Well, it's in this place. And how did you work through that?
100%. So this isn't from in the past couple of days, but this is from the past couple of weeks. So I had been looking for work and I lied on my resume and I lied to my boss. And it was such a simple, petty little lie, but I couldn't help but do it because I was in so much fear. And what was I in fear of? That my material needs and my financial status was dependent on my self-reliance, which I knew was going to fail me, right? And so immediately I did it. And as soon as I did it, I was like, oh, this is me being agnostic, right? Because if God is everything, then God is my employer. I am the employee. I am the agent. Do I believe that God wants me to be financially stable and to be able to provide for my family? Yes, absolutely. And so if I do have this belief, then I don't need to do things like manipulate people or lie about petty things or, et cetera, et cetera. I don't need to grasp for control in these areas. I can just allow whatever is going to be. That job didn't end up working out anyway because it was never meant to be. And so that was a really good lesson on, am I willing to let this part go? But I needed to see it, right?
Love that. And thank you for sharing that vulnerability. I mean, I find it vital for myself and also for others around me to make sure that I'm honest, even if that means that it puts a chink in my armor that makes me look weak to others. But I think that is vital in these settings. Thank you for sharing that, Sarvy. All right, we have a couple of comments came in. I'll just read the comments. They're from Robert P, who was our guest speaker last week on Step 1. Good to have you here again today, Robert. He says, and this is regarding the last couple of answers he gave, science is such a great tangible example of how God works. And then the next one is, my lack of honesty grounded in my shame resulted in me relapsing. Sarvy, do you have any comments on either of those?
Definitely the latter. Yeah, my lack of honesty grounded in my shame resulted in me relapsing. Why? Because honesty is the first principle of this program. It's the principle associated with Step 1. And so the moment I get into dishonesty, I've put myself on a trajectory to go back into my acting out behaviors, right? The book talks about going back to fundamentals. It's not I acted out of nowhere. No, there was like a series of dishonest acts or untrustworthy acts or irresponsible acts that preceded me getting into a place where I'm relapsing. And so being able to watch, pause, turn, do 10 through 12 on a daily basis. That's how I have freedom from that.
Thank you for sharing that. All right, we have another question from our live audience. This is from Esther. Esther asks, how has your recovery affected your relationships with your children and husband, your immediate family? And she loves your honest and insightful words.
Thank you for those kind words, Esther. So my recovery has been a very essential piece in me reestablishing intimacy with my children. I had all these old ideas that I was holding on to of what it looks like for me to be a good mom and what it looked like to raise my children right. And when I started doing the work, I realized that all of these ideas, first of all, I don't even know where half of them came from. And the ones that I could source back, they weren't my ideas, or they were something that like someone had mentioned in passing and I had taken and I had run with it. Or it was me trying to be like a behavioral therapist, which I'm not qualified to be. And a a turning point in my recovery was when I had a fellow who was talking to me about allowing God to parent my children through me, what it looks like for me to be an open channel, and what it looks like for me to simply be an agent of higher power in the way that I parent my kids. Asking myself, what does it look like if God is everything in this moment, especially like bedtime? Very difficult for me. There's a lot of stuff that comes up with parenting from our own childhood or from the stresses in our external environment. So again, it's just about moving out of the way, and letting them have their own journey with God and letting God parent through me.
Do you mind digging into that? Bedtime, a very stressful time. What is a specific example of when that's happened and you've allowed God to parent through you in that case?
So bedtime is difficult for me because of my relationships with my former partner. He is a musician, lived a certain type of lifestyle. And so when I first had my second child, and even my first one, but specifically with my second one, I was left home alone a lot with both of the kids. And so the indignant, self-pitying thoughts and the, I am not enough to handle this, it caused, certain reactions within me that turned out to be traumatic, right? Maybe not the specific event, but how I reacted to it caused a lot of trauma in me. And so today, when I am alone with the kids, a lot of similar stuff comes up. And I find myself wanting to control the situation. You have to act like this so I can feel like I'm doing bedtime right, so that I can get the validation that I'm a good mom and I'm enough and right? Just like that spinning cycle of fears. And so something that's been very simple that I've been doing recently, which has made a very dramatic change, is I pray over my kids when they're going to sleep. And something really simple, but I share it with y'all. It's, God, thank you for my kids. Please allow them to have rest in their body, peace of mind, calm of soul. Please nourish them, take care of them, and protect them as they travel through the astral planes in their dreamland to lives past, present, and future. Please replenish their energy so that they may wake in the morning with the morning sun to emulate your light. And just bringing God into that moment has shifted chaos to calm.
That's beautiful. I love that prayer that you've got there for when they're going to bed. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. During your share, you said, that the program, the 12-step program coming into the rooms, it's not a quote unquote feel good program is how you put it. To the newcomer out there listening, to somebody who's looking for the soft and easy way down, how do you share that it's worth it, even though it's not a feel good program? How do you share that with them?
So first, the relief is almost instantaneous. Being able to come to a space where I hear my darkest secrets spoken out of the mouths of other people, word for word, just knowing that I'm not alone and in community is really relieving. And then coming into a space where I watch people who have the same stories as me, who don't do it anymore, that hope, very relieving. Living on a spiritual basis, the first time that I got on my knees and prayed in the morning, that was a very relieving experience. So there is a lot of relief, especially right in the beginning, that comes in that I think keeps us to get into the hard work, which is the 4 through 9. I read a story, I believe it's like the origin stories of Cinderella maybe and Baba Yaga. And it was talking about how this girl was traveling through the forest and there was night, and then there was the bloody red of dawn, and then there was daybreak. And so as we come out of our bottoms, that nighttime, that dark night of the soul, and we start doing the work, the bloody red of dawn, it's messy, it's painful, it's uncomfortable, but I do it with the faith that there is light at the end of that tunnel. And that evidence is before me in my sponsor and the fellows around me. Yeah.
Excellent. Perfect. Thank you so much for that. I have one more question before we start the wrap up here. You mentioned, and you said this, and I've heard this before, that you previously believed that religion equals God and God equals brainwashing. Mm-hmm. And you come from this from an agnostic point of view. I want to ask this from your experience working with people who come from a religious point of view. Religion equals God and God equals religion. How does one divorce that connection and still, have a foundation under them of some sort of something that they can trust in? Does that make sense, that question?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's a great question. So the first thing is asking them, or asking, yourself, if I've come from a religious background, was it working? Probably no. If I'm here in program, it's probably because the religion wasn't working. And then I have to ask myself, okay, what was it that wasn't working? Because it's so easy for me to overgeneralize and get into a space of prejudice and all people of this religion are like this or whatever. But looking at it and being like, was it the principles of the religion that weren't working? Or was it maybe the imperfect ways that the humans that ran the religious institution weren't working? Because those are two very separate things. All religions all around the world, first of all, have very similar ideas. And they're all grounded on principles of love, kindness, generosity, devotion to the people around you, to God, right? These are successful principles. But oftentimes simply walking in, seeking that solution without a guiding motivation is not going to be enough. And the last thing I'll say on that is Dr. Bob, in the book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it talks about how he had tried several spiritual solutions, but none of them had worked for him until he understood the problem as it was stated in the doctor's opinion. And so I can't seek a spiritual solution if I don't understand that I have a spiritual problem. So religion might work in other areas of my life, but it's not going to work in treating my addiction.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Before we close up, Sarvy, do you have any final words of wisdom that you would like to share with us?
Keep doing the work. It's really simple. Seeking God all throughout the day and showing up on a spiritual basis. It's not this big complex thing. My sponsor told me we are not trained Buddhist monks. We are ex-crackheads, drunks, codependents, right? Seeking God means sitting in silence for 2-3 minutes at a time. Nobody is asking us to do anything extravagant. The worship is just a gesture of how much I want it, not what God needs to operate. So that's it.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Sarvy. That was a great RECO12 weekly speaker meeting for all addicts and those wanting to learn more about addiction and the recovery therefrom. If you have additional questions that we weren't able to get to or that you'd like to ask, please go to RECO12.com/forum and join in our community and ask those questions and answer others' questions that may come up. I invite the audience to come back next week. Next week, we will be doing step 3, and step 3 will be covered by one of my favorite people in the world, Harvey E. from Toronto. And he will be sharing his experience, strength, and hope in regards to step 3. And it should be a great meeting, and I look forward to seeing you all back here then. Now, let's launch off into the rest of our day with the set-aside prayer that Sarvy will be voice for.
Thank you. So a version that I really like is, God, please help me to be honest with myself and with you. Please help me to be open-minded to the 12 steps and the principles. Please help me to be open-minded to your new way of life. And please help me to be willing to do your will.
Thank you so much. Keep coming back, everybody. It works when I work it. So work it. You are worth it.
this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight. Still searching for glimmers of light. Feet still on the ground, I can still be found. Standing still.
I still can fly. I may not soar unfettered. I may not rise too high.
Recorded in the book of life and bind it with the seal.